That is so false.
It's absolutely true, Governor.
No,
Next on KQED Newsroom, California Governor Jerry Brown and his opponent Neel Kashkari square off in their only scheduled debates.
We lost 1.4 million jobs. Since I've been elected, almost 1.3 million have come back to California. We've got momentum, and we're headed in the right direction.
Is your family back? Are your kids in good schools today? Do you feel good about your job? Do you have the job that you want, the job that you deserve? I'm running for governor to fight for your family.
All members vote who desire to vote.
I'm John Myers at the state capitol in Sacramento, where the largest freshman class of the legislature in more than a generation has just finished its first term, and they just might make Sacramento work for a change.
Plus, thought-provoking exhibits and crowd-pleasing shows. A preview of arts events in the Bay Area this fall.
Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Scott Schaefer is off tonight. This week, Governor Brown and his Republican opponent Neel Kashkari held a spirited debate, the only one that Brown has agreed to before the November 4th election. The candidates clashed over jobs, education, and high-speed rail. Here's a fiery exchange over a recent court case regarding teacher tenure.
Schools. You had a choice between fighting for the civil rights of poor kids and fighting for the union bosses who funded your campaigns. You sided with the union bosses. You should be ashamed of yourself, Governor. I'm going to fight for the kids. I'm going to fight for the kids. I want you to know that.
That makes no sense at all. That is so false.
It's absolutely true, Governor.
No, it isn't.
It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true.
Gentlemen, I don't think we're going to disagree.
Joining me now for some perspective and the official kickoff to election season are Carla Marinucci, San Francisco Chronicle senior political writer; Corey Cook, director of the Leo McCarthy Center at the University of San Francisco; and John Myers, KQED politics and government senior editor, joining us from the state capitol. John, you moderated this debate, as we just saw. Let's start with a debrief from you. What were your observations from your front row seat?
Well, it was intense. I think that the exchange shows it. I think that Neel Kashkari came prepared with a lot of attacks, a lot of criticisms. He had to show that he could stand up to the governor and make his case. I think the governor got angry. I think the governor kind of fired back a lot, and you heard it there. Teacher tenure in the Vergara court case was one of those big issues. Another one that I thought was interesting was the governor trying to defend something that he's had a hard time defending lately, which was high-speed rail.
To expand to meet our 10 million new people, or even 15 million, we'll have to either expand Interstate 5, build more freeways, more airports, more runways. If we take part of that burden and put it into high-speed rail, it'll be cheaper, it'll be cleaner.
He's raising your gas prices to fund his vanity project called the high-speed train, what I call the crazy train. You know, they talk about creating jobs. You know what else creates jobs? Building water storage all around the state. Not one dam like his little water bond. A real infrastructure investment in water.
So both men on fire last night, John, but this was the debate that almost didn't happen. I heard that the night before, Kashkari's camp raised a major issue. They were threatening to pull out. What happened, and what were some of your other behind-the-scenes observations?
Well, we spent the Labor Day weekend in a discussion. I guess it's a dispute with the Kashkari campaign. The debate all along had been a seated campaign. The candidates sitting in chairs. It was a relatively small studio at the California Channel. We wanted to have a clean production there. Kashkari campaign had not raised any issues about sitting until Sunday, when they informed us that the candidate not only didn't want to sit, but would not sit. And that raised a lot of issues about fairness, about the way you shoot a television program. We continued to have discussions with them. They continued to say no way. And the media organizers, which was KQED, the Los Angeles Times, Telemundo 52 from LA, and the California Channel, all got together and said, look, you're going to have to agree to the rules that we've been telling you the whole time, or we're going to cancel the debate. We gave them until the morning of the debate, Thursday morning, and about 2 minutes before our deadline, they said, okay, we don't want to do it, but we'll do it. And that was the case there. And so, yeah, it was an odd kind of play behind the scenes there. There was also a little tension, I think, and nervousness when the two candidates came in the studio. There was a few minutes before you saw it on television where they were trying to kind of get in their game face, and it's awkward because these two men, when they walked out of that studio, Twee, they do not like each other.
I think we got a clear glimpse of that during the debate, John. Just real quickly, in your mind, was there a winner?
You know, I don't know. I mean, I think that the old adage is that if you're against the heavyweight champion and you don't knock the champion down, can you really win? Can you win on points? I think Kashkari had a good night. He made a lot of cases for what he wants to do and what he thinks the governor hasn't done. The governor is really far ahead in this. He's got a lot of money in this campaign. He did not stumble. In that sense, I guess I call it a draw, but I would not say that Kashkari had a bad night. He did pretty well.
He did put himself on the map. He very much came out strong. Let's bring in Carla Marinucci and also Corey Cook into this conversation. Carla, you were there at the debate as well.
That's right.
They clashed on numerous other issues. The Tesla plant, battery plant, going to Nevada instead of being in California, immigration, Governor Brown's prison realignment program. What was your key takeaway?
You know, I think Neel Kashkari had to introduce himself to so many voters, 60% of them don't know them, and he introduced himself as not your father's Republican, a guy who was talking about Governor Brown being not there on issues of poverty. I mean, this is the guy who went to India and hung out with Mother Teresa. It's hard to go to the left on Jerry Brown when it comes to that issue, but on that issue and on other issues, Neel Kashkari sort of wanted to portray himself as a different kind of Republican, and in doing so, I think is helping to rebrand the California Republican Party. So on that level, he accomplished it, and it was, I have to say, to John's credit, refreshing to see these two sit down without audience, no frills, and just discuss the issues. It's the kind of discussion that should be happening more in California and is not because of the power plays that go on that John described.
Well, Carla, you brought up the Republican Party, so I'll pose this question to you, Corey. I mean, at this point, let's take a look ahead and broaden this out at this point. What does the Republican Party need to do to increase its base? You've got an increasing Latino population, now about 34% of California. You've got an increasing number of millennials registering with no party preference, 30% of them.
Well, Latino voters are 38% of the population, but only 18% of the electorate. So that proportion is going to grow over the coming generation. And so Republicans have a long-term structural problem in California, and this is exactly right. That what Carla said is perfectly right. Republicans are looking at the long game here, and so I think this is an opportunity to reposition the party to save some of the down ballot races. They're doing pretty well in local elections. They won the mayoral race in San Diego. They really need to look at this as a 8 to 12 to 16-year plan to really rebuild the Republican Party, and they have a candidate now who I think has the opportunity to have voters take a second look at the Republicans and say, yeah, this isn't the Republican Party you're familiar with. You may not vote for me in this coming election, but you might want to take a look at the Republican Party moving forward. And I think they are repositioning themselves. They lost 300,000 registered voters between 2012 and 2014, the Republican Party. They've got a long way to go. They're basically now hitting rock bottom. And so for them to turn this around, it really is going to be a long-term, a long, slow change in the party. And I think last night was a good night for the Republican Party to start that transformation.
And the Republican Party aside, Carla, how do you think the overall demographic changes? Latino population, Asian population, how will that affect some of the key races that are coming up? For example, South Bay Congressman Mike Honda versus Ro Khanna.
Absolutely right. When you're talking about the 17th Congressional District in Silicon Valley, you're talking about the largest Asian majority population congressional district in mainland United States. And you've got South Asians, that growing population, a lot of them behind Ro Khanna. You've got a tech group versus labor and traditional Democratic interests down there who are behind Honda. This is a race to watch, and it really does sort of dramatize exactly what we're talking about, as in the governor's race. California is changing. California is at the tip of a lot of trend-setting areas in politics this year, and I think that's why what we're seeing in the governor's race with Neel Kashkari, a young, sort of dynamic South Asian candidate, and with Ro Khanna down there in the South San Jose area, same kind of dynamic.
John, I want to also turn to something else that's turning out to be a pretty contentious issue in the upcoming November election, and that is Prop 46. That seems to be one of the most heated propositions, and there's a big war chest building against it. Who's behind that effort and why?
Well, let's describe what Prop 46 would do if passed. It would do more than one thing, and I think that's one of the reasons you're going to get a lot of fighting here. It would lift a long-standing cap on medical malpractice awards in California, which has been $250,000. It would lift it above that to $1 million, which of course is something that is debated as to whether or not that makes things more litigious, whether it's fair for victims of medical malpractice. It also would require drug testing of doctors. That I think suspect was kind of thrown in as the political sweetener here, because that sounds a little more interesting than medical malpractice. But this is a $50–60 million campaign. This is the big elephant on the November ballot. It's trial lawyers versus doctors. We're going to see a lot of ads, a lot of nasty campaigning. And this measure and the candidate races that you all were talking about, Twee, again, we all know elections are about who shows up. How big is voter turnout? How small is voter turnout? Who's motivated? What are they motivated by? And on a ballot measure like Prop 46, the easiest thing to do in California politics is to get people to vote no. I don't know enough about that. It's too complicated. No. And so the people who want to change those things in medical malpractice and drug testing, the odds are going to be tough for them.
Let's talk about also another key race, Corey, in November, and that's the Tom Torlakson and Marshall Tucker race. They're Marshall Tuck race, rather, and they're both running for state schools chief, Torlakson being the incumbent. Let's go back to the Vergara decision. That's the teacher tenure ruling, because that is having an impact on that race.
It is, and I think it came up last night in the context of the governor's race, and it's a little bit of a stretch to see how that will play out in the governor's race, but it's going to have a direct effect in the race for the superintendent of public instruction. And as you noted, Tom Torlakson, the superintendent, has asked the governor to appeal the ruling. I mean, he's clearly supported by the Teachers Association. He's been in favor of teacher tenure. He's voiced a lot of opposition to the Vergara ruling, and his opponent, Marshall Tuck, has said, that this is a civil rights issue, and as the judge laid out in that case, California children have an equal right to education in the state as a constitutional protection, and so they frame this as a civil rights issue, this issue of teacher tenure. So this is actually where this is going to play out. I think it's the most competitive of the statewide races. It's the one I think a lot of people are looking towards.
And these are two Democrats who have taken two very different views on
That's
this.
right.
The question is, which one of these is going to resonate with voters out there?
And
it is
the other
interesting that
question is, how much money is there going to be for someone like Marshall Tuck? Because the CTA, the teachers union, is going to help Tom Torlakson. Right. They've been with him a long time.
That's right.
And what's interesting is that Marshall Tuck, a Democrat, like you mentioned, is most closely allied on this issue with Neel Kashkari, a Republican. Right. Will the real test come 4 years from now, when we're talking about the governor's race, when Brown is turned out? Is that when you're really going to see whether it might be a Republican or an independent?
I think you've hit it right. I mean, a lot of people are looking at Neel Kashkari right now, who's already put $2 million of his own money into this race, saying, what is his game plan? He cannot win against Sherry Brown. He's behind double digits. Is he looking ahead to that next race? And that, I think, is where everyone's going right now. Already, eyes are sort of turning to the next generation and who are going to be the leaders in both parties, and whether Neel Kashkari is going to be part of that picture.
And I think this election we're looking primarily at whether the Republicans can avoid the two-thirds majority in the Assembly and the Senate. They're looking at whether they can maybe pick up one of the congressional races. I think this is an important election as a test of the top two primary, which I think changes some of the dynamics a little bit. There are 26 races, I think, in California where there are orphan voters who don't have a candidate from their party on the ballot. About 12 of those are pretty well contested. And I think candidates and campaigns are learning how this top two system works. And I think we might see 2 or 4 years from now a different type of context under these top two primary systems.
Well, it's been fascinating. Oh, John, go ahead. Did you want to add something?
Of course, it also depends who shows up. I mean, the president's approval ratings in California are all-time low. Maybe Democrats aren't quite as motivated as they need to be. And again, the electorate, the composition of the electorate is going to be fascinating, I think. All
right. Well, I could listen to you guys talk all day. It's been very fascinating. But all good things must come to an end. Thank you all for being here. Carla Marinucci, Corey Cook, and John Myers. And while keeping an eye on elections, John Myers also recently looked at the potential impact of the largest freshman class in the state legislature in decades. New election rules mean these lawmakers are poised to serve longer than any legislators in the past 20 years. And some political observers think this could lead to more effective governing in Sacramento.
For one night in the summer, California politics take a backseat to America's pastime. It's the traditional Democrats versus Republicans legislative softball game. the proceeds from which go to charity.
We got to be communicating to one another out there. Wherever the ball's going, we got to be talking, hey guys, go to first, go to second.
This softball game has for years seemed like an anomaly in Sacramento. Here, Republicans, not Democrats, dominate.
That's fiscally conservative.
All right.
Three up, three down.
They won this game and almost every game for the past few years. And even more surprising, legislators seem to actually like each other. It's hugs and handshakes all around.
Thank you.
It's quite the contrast to their day jobs at the state capitol, which is why the session of the California legislature that ended last week was so notable.
The tone of how we conduct our work is changing immensely and in very positive ways.
We have developed, I think, a real sense of a class identity.
I mean, we disagree certainly, rather robustly at times, but we get along pretty well.
To the Constitution of the United States.
In fact, many members of the Assembly's freshman class who took the oath of office just 2 years ago see things in a way few California legislators have in the modern era. One big reason is 2012's Proposition 28, longer term limits of up to 12 years in either house. The shorter term limits imposed back in 1990 offered little time to govern, says Democratic Assemblymember Marc Levine.
Legislators, one house or the other, they've known that they've got an expiration date, essentially. So they're looking to run for that other house, the Assembly or the Senate, or to Congress, or even a statewide office. And it means that they're looking more short term. They're basing their legislation on how to get to that next job, and that hasn't been good for us.
Now, says Republican Assemblymember Melendez, there's motivation to act differently.
It's a personal element, so you get to know one another, you become friends, and then I think you're more likely to open up your ears and really listen when they come to you with a piece of legislation that they want you to support.
You have to go back to 1966, the year that Ronald Reagan beat Pat Brown in the race for governor, to find a freshman class of this size elected to the California legislature. This class, of course, was elected in 2012, the same year that the voters relaxed and changed the term limits law about how long you can serve in the state capitol. The voters had already changed the primary rules in California and the way the political districts are drawn. Combine all that together, and you may get something that almost never happens in Sacramento. Real change.
You're seeing movement away from that gridlock, movement away from that inability to deal with the state's most basic issues.
Steve Boilard, who heads up the Center for California Studies at Cal State Sacramento, says that movement may change the political power structure of the Capitol. That power structure for more than 2 decades has been dominated both by the lobbyists, who linger in the State House hallways during every major vote, and by legislative staff who've often been here 2 or even 3 times longer than elected politicians. This group of legislators may change that, says Democratic Assemblymember Susan Eggman.
The context has changed. Like, lobbyists, different advocate groups, they know that we're going to be around for a while. And so I think just in that, people have sort of held back a little bit to see how are we going to interact with this new class.
They're demanding more answers, more information. They're looking at the longer term. And over time, I think it will give them a tremendous amount of power, accumulating the expertise and the relationships that come from spending a long time in office.
Relationships. These newest legislators say the personal can help soften the partisanship that has in the past stifled just about everything else.
I look at it, and I think many of my colleagues do, that I've got to look at you for 12 years. So it's not in my best interest to make an enemy of you in the very beginning, nor is it in your best interest.
The negative impact of single-use plastic bags is well documented.
Even so, there are still serious disagreements. The difference, says Assemblymember Marc Levine, is how those disagreements are handled. It's something he says he discovered from Republicans during the debate over one of his bills this year.
I actually had freshman members come to me and say that they were asked to speak against my bill, that they weren't going to vote for it, but that they were refusing to speak on the floor against. And I think that says something about the relationships that we're building and the long-term thinking that we're putting into our legislation as well.
It does seem like there's a genuine cooperative spirit. And the question is that just a one-time thing by this particular mix of members, or is it a more long-term trend that's coming about as a result of these various reforms that have gone into effect?
All members vote who desire to vote.
It's also hard to know how to measure change at the state capitol. Will a new era mean more bipartisan voting on bills, or simply more bipartisan work on the biggest issues facing the state? A number of legislators point to what happened in August, a bipartisan deal on a new water bond on the November ballot, a $7 billion plan to ensure long-term reliability of water sources across California. The bond passed by an almost unanimous vote in both houses.
And we got Democrats and Republicans that are more unified than I've ever seen probably in my life. So with that,
There weren't a lot of floor speeches. There wasn't a lot of argument. It was just, here's what we've got, let's get it done.
And this freshman class of legislators could change the balance of power between their branch of government and that led by the governor. Jerry Brown is the most seasoned politician in Sacramento, but the next governor after Brown will likely be a rookie compared to a legislature that by then may have almost a decade's more experience in the Capitol.
Over time, we're going to see the legislature reasserting itself as a more powerful player in the process.
And maybe that's why the freshmen who played in this charity softball game were the real MVPs. How they work through their differences will be key. Perhaps more compromise and less of a tendency to just run up the score. That's the kind of hustle for which Californians everywhere seem to be longing.
Thank you so much.
Well, as election season gets going, it's also time for a preview of this season's lineup of arts and performances. We have some big-name shows coming to the Bay Area, including Chinese dissident artist Ai Weiwei, the late great Keith Haring, and soulful, witty country singer Brandy Clark. I talked with Cy Musiker, co-host of KQED's The Do List, to get his top picks. Cy, thank you for being here.
Great to see you, Twee.
Let's start with visual arts, beginning with the Anderson collection at Stanford. The Andersons have donated more than 100 of their modern artworks to the university, and what a collection it is. I know that both of us toured their home when the art was still there.
Now there's a separate museum on the Stanford campus that's just been built for the Anderson collection, about 120 works, Rauschenberg, Pollock, Joan Mitchell, and so many others, just brilliant taste.
And how generous of them to donate this now so everybody else can enjoy it.
That's
also
right.
At Stanford, at Cantor, Robert Frank.
Right.
That exhibit is coming.
Robert Frank is best known for The Americans, a book he created of photographs of the United States. He's a Swiss-born, but he got some Guggenheim grants, and he traveled around the U.S. in the mid-'50s. And they're just beautiful black and white photographs. But what was really special about them was that they kind of punctured the suburban fantasy of how America was all white and all perfect. What's great about the Cantor and the Anderson collection, both, these are free museums. Yeah.
Also want to talk about a couple of exhibits with political overtones, including one being produced remotely from China. How is that? By Ai Weiwei, how is that happening?
Well, he's a very skilled artist who's restricted from leaving China by the Chinese government. He's really a very well-known political prisoner. He was imprisoned for 81 days at one time. Now he can stay in his compound. He can travel a little bit. He's been extraordinarily critical of the government. But the Foresight Foundation here, Cheryl Haynes' group, has asked him to do this. He's going to honor both the military, the fact that this was a military prison, and then one of the toughest federal lockups for years, and its Native American history as a place for protest.
Our show is about freedom, ironically, and the human struggle for freedom of speech.
I also want to ask you about Keith Haring, another show with political overtones. That's coming to the DeYoung.
Right, the DeYoung is going to show stuff. Many of it hasn't been seen in 20 years, 1990 or so, but best known really for his street art. And this is a very politically oriented work that all through his life, but this is about AIDS and nuclear disarmament and the environment and
racial inequality,
corporate skullduggery. So it'll be very interesting to see these works. Some of it is sort of big tarpaulin, paintings on tarpaulin, and others some of his street art.
For music lovers, big season coming up for the SF Jazz Center and also San Francisco Symphony. Michael Chilson Thomas, big anniversary happening.
Right. He's going to have been here 20 years. He came first in 1995. And he told me years and years ago, I want the symphony to be not just making beautiful music, but I want it to be a very happy symphony. And I think they despite the bitter labor strike they had last year, he's made good on that promise. And they're going to be doing a lot of Beethoven this year, but also a fabulous piece by a local composer, Mason Bates, called Alternative Energy, that was just great when it was premiered here a couple of years ago by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra.
SF Jazz, saxophonist Joshua Redman, founding member actually of SF Jazz Collective, brings his trio to
He's
to
always
the center October 2nd.
And then later in the season, two other great saxophonists, Charles Lloyd, reuniting with Zakir Hussain, the tabla master, and Ravi Coltrane. He's going to be here late in the year, and he's going to reimagine his dad's A Love Supreme, John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. It should be an amazing show.
Let's talk real quickly about the pop music front. We've got Beck at the new Masonic Auditorium. We've also got Brandy Clark and Jennifer Nettles coming to Santa Rosa.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited about this. I may be the only one who's really paying attention to Brandy Clark's career. She's best known for a song called Stripes, in which she resists killing her husband only because she doesn't want to be seen in prison stripes or prison orange.
She also has a really amazing song called His Hands about domestic violence, and we have actually a bit of that. So let's take a listen real quick.
And I should've known better when the last 3 times he swore that he would never lay another finger on me, but the truth's on my face.
We also love theater and dance here in the Bay Area. Let's start with the Berkeley Rep. Party People Universe is coming.
I'm very excited about this. This is produced by Universes, which is out of New York. They're a group that's kind of gone out and interviewed people with the Young Lords, which was a Dominican and Puerto Rican radical group in the 60s, and the Black Panthers. And they've created the show Party People.
Hamburgers and gas guzzlers, living off the sweat off someone else's back. That's
and
the American.
Let's go through 2 more things really quickly. The Bathsheba Dance Company and also Rapture, Blister, and Burn.
Yeah, Bathsheba, dynamic Tel Aviv-based company coming to the Bay Area. They're celebrating their 50th anniversary, but what's called Gaga dance style.
And Rapture, Blister, Burn.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this show. It's at the Aurora Theater. Gina Gianfrido wrote this play about feminism and internet porn, and it's about can women have it all?
All right, well, you managed to cover some of it because this is just the tip of the iceberg. Sai, thank you.
Thank you.
And for more information, we have the full Fall Arts Preview on kqed.org/arts. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Thuy Vu. Have a good night.